3 years earlier, Aaron Kessler had walked out of that house with 2 suitcases and never looked back. He didn't look back when his wife stood in the doorway, 7 months pregnant, holding the frame with one hand. He told her the marriage was over, and he told her the company was his, and both of those things sounded true when he said them. Now he was standing on the same doorstep in the rain, and he was knocking. He had left her for her best friend. He had left her for a bigger house, a family with money, a version of his life he thought was an upgrade. He signed a paper on the way out that he never bothered to read. That paper is the whole story. Because the company he thought he was keeping had a name on the ownership documents, and the name was not his, it was hers. It had been hers since the day the money that started it came out of her inheritance. $62,000, wired on the 14th of March, into an account he barely remembered existed. This is the story of Nora Kessler. For most of their marriage, Aaron ran the part of the business people could see, and Nora ran the part they couldn't. Kessler Remodeling wasn't big. 3 trucks, a rented equipment yard on the east side of Cincinnati, a crew that fluctuated between 6 and 9 men depending on the season. But it was growing, and in the neighborhoods where they worked, the older suburbs where people finally had the money to redo a kitchen they'd hated for 15 years, the Kessler name meant something. That name was Aaron's face. He was good at the handshake, good at standing in a gutted living room and describing the finished thing so vividly the homeowner could already see it. He closed deals. He believed, completely, that closing deals was the business. Nora did everything else. She did the billing, the payroll, the insurance certificates, the licensing renewals, the vendor accounts, the quarterly taxes, the lien waivers, the thing where you call the county 3 times to get 1 permit corrected. She was a medical billing coder by training, which is a job that is entirely about knowing exactly what a piece of paper says and keeping every copy of it. She had a filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, and it was locked, and Aaron thought that was a little much for a home office. He used to call her work the paperwork, as in, I'll bring in the jobs, you handle the paperwork. He said it the way you talk about taking out the trash. Necessary, beneath him, invisible. They'd been married almost 5 years. He was 34, she was 31. And somewhere in year 4, Sloane Rivera came back into the picture. Sloane had been Nora's best friend since college, the kind of friendship that survives on the assumption that it always would. Sloane's family had real money, the quiet Cincinnati kind, and Sloane had a way of walking into a room and making the room feel smaller for not having noticed her sooner. She started coming around when Nora got pregnant. She was helpful, she was warm. She told Aaron more than once that a man with his talent was thinking too small. Aaron liked hearing that. He liked it a lot. The night he moved out, he handed Nora a stack of documents his lawyer had drawn up. Separation terms, a division of assets, a page that assigned the business interests as he understood them. He wanted her signature so he could keep the company clean and simple as he walked into his new life. She signed. She didn't argue. He took that as weakness. He never noticed that the page describing the company's ownership was a page his lawyer had written from what Aaron told him, not from anything on file. He signed his own copy without reading past the first paragraph. None of this makes sense if you look at it from the outside. A woman, 7 months pregnant, is left by her husband for her best friend. He takes the trucks, the crew, the name on the side of the vehicles, and the future. And she lets him. No screaming match on the lawn, no lawyer sending threatening letters, no calls to Sloane at 2 in the morning. She packs his coffee maker in a box and leaves it by the garage door and goes to bed. People who knew Nora read that as a woman too broken to fight. It was the opposite. It was a woman who had already read every document in the house and knew exactly what each one said. Nora didn't fight over the company because she understood a thing Aaron had forgotten, if he ever fully grasped it at all, on paper. Kessler Remodeling was not his to take. The LLC had a managing member, and the managing member was Nora Kessler. The startup capital had been her money. The equipment and the trucks were tied to a secured note, a loan with collateral, and the person who held that note was her, not the bank, her. When Aaron said, "The company is mine," he was describing the part he could see, the jobs, the crew, the reputation. He wasn't wrong that he'd built that. He was just wrong about who owned the machine underneath it. So Nora let him have the part that was visible. She signed his papers and kept her own. She wasn't planning anything, not in the way you plan a revenge. She was doing what she had always done, which was keep the originals and wait for the paperwork to matter. People imagine that a woman in her position must have spent those first months plotting. She didn't. She spent them being pregnant and then being exhausted and then, slowly, being okay. She went back to her coding job part-time. She set up a nursery in the room that wasn't the office. She let the company run on its own inertia, filing what needed filing when the accountant called, and she genuinely did not know, in those early months, whether Erin's new venture would soar or sink. She only knew that either way, the foundation had her name on it, and that whichever way it went, she would not be her mother, standing in a doorway with nothing to show for 20 years, but a story nobody would take her word for. She knew the paperwork would matter eventually. Paperwork always does. To understand why Nora was the way she was, you have to go back to a different house, and a different woman standing in a different doorway. Her mother. When Nora was 9, her father left, not dramatically. He just stopped coming home, and then the house was sold, and then they were in an apartment on the other side of town with the heat kept low. Her mother had run that household for 20 years, raised the kids, kept the family, done, in Nora's words, everything. And she walked away from the marriage with almost nothing, because her name was not on the deed, not on the accounts, not on the business her husband ran out of the garage. "He didn't cheat me out of anything," her mother told her once years later, in a voice with no self-pity in it at all. "I just never signed for any of it, so none of it was mine to keep." Nora was a teenager when she decided that would never be her. It wasn't bitterness. It was more like the way some people learn to always check the locks. She kept records. She read the fine print. When she got her first apartment, she kept every lease. When she started coding for the hospital billing office, she was the one everybody came to because she never threw away the version of a claim that proved she was right. The other coders used to tease her about it. There was a running joke that if the building burned down, Nora would walk out with the right folder. She didn't mind the joke. She'd seen what happened to a woman who couldn't produce the right folder. Her mother had spent a year and a half after the divorce trying to prove she'd paid half the mortgage on a house that was sold out from under her, and she never could. Because she trusted that being married was the same as being on the deed. It isn't. Nora learned that at 14 and never unlearned it. So she grew up into a person who found other people's chaos almost physically uncomfortable. She alphabetized, she backed things up, she kept the originals of things most people scanned once and threw away. It looked, to someone like Erin, like fussiness. To Nora, it was the only kind of safety she believed in. The kind you could hold in your hand and put in front of a judge. So when Erin wanted to start the company and the bank looked at his credit and his zero collateral and said no, it was Nora who made it possible. Her grandmother had died the winter before and left her $62,000. That money became the down payment on the first truck and the deposit on the equipment yard and the operating cash for the first 8 months, before the jobs started paying for themselves. To make the financing work, the LLC had to be structured around the person the money and the collateral actually belonged to. Nora set it up herself. She was the managing member. The secured note on the equipment was in her name. She drew up the operating agreement, printed 2 copies, and had Erin sign one at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night while a preseason football game was on. He signed where she pointed. He was thinking about the game. "You sure we need all this?" he asked. "We need all this," she said. There was a folding camp chair in the garage that whole time, an ugly orange one they bought for a lake trip and never used again. Erin left it behind when he moved out. Small thing. But it was the kind of small, real thing that stays in a house after a person is gone. Proof that the life had actually happened. She put the operating agreement, the note, and the inheritance records in the locked cabinet in the spare room. And then, for 4 years, none of it mattered. For the first several months, Erin's new life looked exactly like the upgrade he'd told himself it was. He moved into Sloane's house, a big place in one of the newer developments with the kind of kitchen his company got hired to build. Sloane put money into the business. She had ideas. She thought Kessler Remodeling should stop doing kitchens for retired school teachers and start doing whole house renovations for people like her. Bigger jobs, bigger crews, a second yard, a real office instead of the corner of a spare bedroom. Erin loved it. This was the version of himself he'd always believed in. He leased 2 more trucks. He hired. He took out a line of credit to float the bigger projects, because bigger projects meant paying for materials months before the client paid you. He signed for all of it as the owner. Nobody at the bank checked the LLC's actual operating agreement, because why would they? Erin Kessler was Kessler Remodeling as far as anyone in Cincinnati was concerned. Nora heard about most of it secondhand. Cincinnati is a big enough city, and a small enough one, that the news of your ex-husband moving into your former best friend's house travels to you whether you want it or not. A cousin mentioned it. Someone from the old neighborhood sent her a message she didn't answer. She was 8 months pregnant by then 9, then not pregnant anymore, but holding a newborn at 3 in the morning, and the last thing she had energy for was Erin's new kitchen. But she noticed one thing, because noticing was the thing she did. The company kept operating, which meant sooner or later the company was going to need a signature only she could give. She didn't do anything about it. She just filed the thought where she filed everything and waited. Then, about 5 months in, a leasing company called the office looking for a signature. They needed the managing member of the LLC to sign a renewal on the equipment financing. Standard thing. Aaron told the woman on the phone that he was the owner and he'd sign whatever they needed. It has to be the managing member of record, she said. That's a Nora Kessler. He told her it was a clerical error. He told her he'd get it corrected. He hung up and didn't think about it again. He mentioned it to Sloane that night, actually, in passing, laughing about it. Some paperwork thing with Nora's name still floating around. He'd have his lawyer fix it. Sloane didn't laugh. She asked what he meant by Nora's name being on the financing. He waved it off. It was the first small crack in the story he'd been selling her, and he papered over it the way he papered over everything, with confidence and a change of subject. The leasing company sent a follow-up letter. It went in a drawer. A second letter came. That went in the drawer too. Aaron had a theory of paperwork, and the theory was that paperwork was a thing that eventually took care of itself if you were successful enough. He'd been proven right often enough to believe it. Contractors who are good at the handshake get a lot of forgiveness for being bad at the file cabinet, right up until they don't. It was not a clerical error. When you build your life on a foundation you didn't lay, you don't know where the weak points are. You find out the hard way, and usually at the worst possible time. By the second year, the cracks started showing. In the business and between Aaron and Sloane at roughly the same time. The bigger job Sloane had pushed for came with bigger risk. One high-end renovation went badly. A structural surprise behind a wall, a change order fight, a client who stopped paying and got a lawyer. The line of credit that had felt like proof of success now felt like a hand around the throat. Material costs jumped. 2 of the newer trucks were leased at rates that made sense only when the money was coming in fast. And Sloane, watching all this, started to see something she hadn't seen before. The man she'd told was thinking too small turned out to need her money to think big at all. The talent she'd admired was real, but it was the talent of a man who could sell a kitchen, not a man who could run a company through a bad year. She'd invested in a version of Aaron that only existed when everything was going up. They fought about money. They fought about control. Sloane started asking, pointedly, whose company this actually was. Aaron didn't have as clean an answer as he wanted to have. The fights got specific in the way that only money fights do. Sloane had put in, by her count, a little over $90,000 across the 2 years, and she wanted it treated like ownership, not like a favor to a boyfriend. She wanted to see the books. And when she started actually looking at the books, she found what Aaron had never quite explained to her, that the company she thought she was buying into had a structure underneath it she didn't recognize. There was a managing member on the LLC filing, and it wasn't Aaron. There was a secured note on the equipment, and it wasn't held by any bank she could call. Who is Nora on all of this? She asked him one night. He told her it was old paperwork. He told her it would get cleaned up. He'd been telling people that for 2 years, the leasing company, the bank, now Sloane, and the paperwork never once got cleaned up, because the only person who could clean it up was the person whose name was on it, and he kept not calling her. Sloane was smart enough to hear the wrong note in his voice. She'd grown up around real money, which mostly means she'd grown up around people who read documents before they signed them. She started, quietly, to protect herself. The equipment lender came back around harder this time because a payment had slipped. And again, the paperwork pointed at a name that wasn't his. This time he couldn't wave it off with a clerical error line. He had to call Nora. It was the first time they'd spoken in over a year. She had a 2-year-old now, a child Aaron had never met, whose name he'd learned from a mutual acquaintance. He didn't ask about the kid. He asked her to sign a document so his lender would stay calm. Nora listened. She was calm the way a person is calm when they already know how a thing ends. I'll look at whatever they send me, she said, nothing more. He read that as her being agreeable. He hung up thinking he still had the wheel in his hands. He didn't ask why the lender needed her signature and not his. If he had let that question sit for even a minute, the whole shape of it might have come clear. But Aaron had never once, in 5 years of marriage, understood what the paperwork was for. The 3rd year is when it came apart completely. The bad jobs lawyer won a judgment, the line of credit got called, and the equipment lender, tired of a managing member who couldn't produce a valid signature from the actual managing member, moved to protect its collateral under the secured note. The note was in Nora's name. The trucks and the equipment were the collateral. When the lender came to recover, they came for the machines that made the company a company. And every document said, correctly, that the party on the other side of that note was Nora Kessler, not Aaron. He watched 2 trucks get taken out of the yard on a flatbed on a Wednesday. He stood in the office he'd rented to look like a real company and realized the office was the only thing left that had his name on the lease, and the lease was the one thing he actually wished he could get out of. The crew went next. Not all at once, that's not how it happens. First, the 2 newest guys stopped showing up because a paycheck bounced. Then the foreman, a man named Ruiz who'd been with Aaron since the second truck, sat in his cab in the parking lot for 20 minutes one morning and then drove away and didn't come back. Ruiz had a family. He'd stayed longer than the money justified because he liked Aaron, and there's a specific kind of quiet that settles over a company when even the people who like you start doing the math. Aaron heard later that Ruiz went to work for a competitor across town. He didn't blame him. He'd have done the same. He was just surprised by how fast a thing you spent 5 years building can come apart once the paper stops holding it together. By the end of that month, there were no trucks in the yard and no crew to drive them, and the sign he'd been so proud of, Kessler Remodeling, in the clean blue letters he'd picked himself, was still bolted to the fence of a yard that no longer had anything in it. Sloane was already gone by then. She'd pulled her money out while there was still money to pull, cut her losses, and stopped returning the calls of a man she'd once said was thinking too small. She'd been right, in the end, though not in the way she'd meant it. He had been thinking too small. He'd spent 3 years thinking he owned something he'd never even read the terms on. And in the middle of losing all of it, Aaron finally did the arithmetic he should have done at a kitchen table 5 years earlier. The one name that appeared, correct and untouchable, on every piece of paper that mattered. The LLC, the note, the operating agreement, the account the original $62,000 had come from, was Nora's. She hadn't taken anything from him. She'd simply never given it away, because it had never been his to begin with. There was a child, too, almost 3 now, his. He had 1 door left to knock on, and he knew it, and he hated that he knew it. It was raining the night he came back, which is the kind of detail that sounds invented and usually isn't. Nora opened the door and he was standing there, thinner, older, the confidence sanded off him. Behind her, down the hall, a small light was on in a child's room. He didn't lead with an apology. Men like Aaron almost never do. They lead with the thing they think you'll say yes to. He led with the business. He told her the company was failing. He told her that technically, on paper, she still had standing in it. He'd learned that much, finally. He said that if she'd just sign a few things, restructure the note, put her name back to work on his behalf, they could save it. Maybe save it together. He looked past her at the light in the hallway when he said the word together. Nora let him finish. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct him as he went, didn't do the thing a lot of people would have done, which is, enjoy it. She stood in her own doorway and let the man who'd walked out of it 3 years ago explain to her why she should now save him. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. The rain kept on. Somewhere behind her, the child's light stayed on. Then she went to the spare room and came back with a folder. It was the same locked cabinet, the same manila folder she'd been keeping since before any of this. She didn't slam anything down. She opened it on the little table by the door and turned it so he could see, the way you'd show someone a bill they were about to dispute. She'd kept everything. The operating agreement he'd signed at the kitchen table during a football game, his signature right there next to the words, Managing Member, Nora Kessler. The secured note, the record of the wire, $62,000, the 14th of March, from the account her grandmother had left her. 3 years of financing correspondence, every one of them addressed, correctly, to her. There's nothing to save, she said. There's nothing to save because there was never a company that was yours to lose. You lost your line of credit. You lost Sloane. You didn't lose Kessler Remodeling, Aaron, because it was never yours to take. She had already made her one deliberate move, quietly, weeks before he showed up, the way she did everything. She'd exercised her rights under the note. The recovered equipment, the LLC's remaining assets, the name itself, all of it had reverted, legally and cleanly, to the managing member. Not as revenge, as paperwork. She'd registered a small, solvent version of the company under her own control. No debt. No Sloane, no leased trucks she couldn't afford, the same way you'd close a bad valve to save the rest of the system. I kept the parts that were real, she said. You can't buy those back. For a long moment he didn't say anything. He looked at the operating agreement, at his own signature next to the words he'd never read, and you could watch 3 years of a story he'd told himself rearrange behind his eyes. He'd spent all that time believing Nora had lost. That she'd been the one left behind, the one too quiet and too soft to hold on to anything. And the whole time the machine underneath his life had been sitting in a locked cabinet in a spare room, with her name on it, waiting. You could have told me, he said. It came out smaller than he meant it to. I did tell you, she said. You signed it. He asked about the child. Finally, she told him the door for that was open and it had a name, and it was not the same door as the one he'd come to ask about tonight. Those were two different doors, and he only got to walk through one of them, and it wasn't the one with the company behind it. Then she closed the door he'd knocked on, gently, and turned off the porch light. Today, Kessler Remodeling still runs 3 trucks out of a yard on the east side of Cincinnati. It's smaller than Aaron's version ever got, and it never misses a payroll, and the name on the operating agreement is the same name it's always been. Nora does the paperwork. She also does the handshake now, because it turned out she could do that part too. She'd just never been given the room. The child is in school. There's a folding orange camp chair in the garage that nobody has ever gotten around to throwing out. Aaron rebuilt something, eventually. A smaller crew, other people's companies, his name on nobody's door but the rental he lives in. He works for another contractor now, a younger man who is good with a file cabinet, and Aaron is good with the handshake, and the arrangement works because each of them knows exactly what he is and isn't. He sees the child on the weekends the arrangement allows. He is, by every account, a more careful man than he used to be. That kind of carefulness, arriving 3 years late, helps exactly no one, least of all the woman who needed it when it counted. Sloane moved away. Nora heard she'd remarried, into more money, into a life with better lawyers. The friendship never got repaired, and Nora stopped waiting for the version of Sloane who'd apologize somewhere around the time she stopped waiting for anything from anyone. She'd learned young that the people who leave you rarely come back to make it right. They come back, if they come back at all, to ask for something. He signed a paper once without reading it because he was sure he already knew what it said. He was sure of a lot of things. That was always the problem. No fairy tales, no easy endings. Just a woman who kept the originals because she learned at 14 that nobody else would, and a man who figured out what the paperwork was for about 3 years after it stopped mattering for him.